you, it could be a bit intimidating. Like,
yeah, that would really, I mean, what would that dynamic be like? Would they, were they supportive or were they competitive as well? Like, I imagine there would be a mix of things.
There was a lot of guys that were like, what are these kids doing here?
Wow.
And then there's a lot that are just like you see in professional sports when the rookies come along and they want to bring along the next generation. But it's a very interesting dynamic, and especially for my parents, like sled hockey is a full contact sport, and I played it from a young age against full grown men. Like, my dad was a coach on the team, so he was more involved than a lot of parents, and like right there. But I'm sure for my mom, every time I got hit by one of them, it was like I might be making a hospital visit. And what do I tell these people? Like, I let my son, who's wheelchair bound, play full contact hockey. Like,
sorry, that must be like, I mean, on one hand, your parents must be pretty freaking incredible, to be able to like let you do that, because that I mean, I know I would be freaking out and the anxiety would be really high, but and then on top of that, I'm trying to think, like, that must have had to make you kind of grow up a lot faster.
Yeah, I tell everybody this. I didn't really realize that I was any different from my older brother until I got out of high school, because it was like everybody in my towns and my brother's friends and kids that I grew up with kind of looked after me.
Mm-hmm.
So nobody treated me as any different. It wasn't until I got out of the bubble of my area and I went to other places, and I would roll into a classroom and the kids would look at me funny. And I would be like, well, this is new, because my family never told me, like, we don't think you can do this because of this. It was always, if this is what you want to do, we're going to figure it out and you're going to do it. Like, I wasn't aware of the limitations that the outside society thought of myself, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's amazing, like, how society will try to tell you what you can and can't do. And if you are brought up in a supportive environment where they're just like, yeah, you can do this, like that, it would be a bit of a shock. And it would probably, I would imagine, be kind of frustrating to be like, no, this is fine. I can do these things. Like, stop, kitten gloving me almost, I would imagine you'd be feeling.
I get frustrated sometimes when I see parents of other kids with disabilities and they kind of put them in a bubble, and especially, I'm sure Anthony Salerno.
Yeah.
Anthony has to tell me, because I'll get upset and I'll be like, what is this lady doing? He'll have to come out at me and be like, Dill, not everybody is like the family that you had. They don't look at it the same way as, and you kind of, I like to say my role with Surfer Roll is more of a cheerleader than anything, because my role really is explaining to these people what's going to happen, as opposed to Cliff or Will or everybody else telling them surfing's great, we're just going to go surf and everything's going to be fine. I'm an example there of, this is someone with an outside circumstance that's doing this, that can show you that even though this may be a barrier that you're facing, it's still possible. We just have to go about it in a roundabout way.
Yeah. I want to ask, like, how did you meet Cliff and the Scudin family? I'm kind of curious.
So, I met Cliffy driving the jet skis at one of the Wheels to Water outings. And I think it was the second time I had ever surfed, and it was about head high. And I was wiping out on pretty much every single wave, but I would come up with a huge smile on my face. So that's a similar mentality that those scooting boys have,
Yes.
where there's a little screw loose, and you're just gonna go no matter what, and there's no fear, and you just go and whatever happens.
Yeah, definitely. No offense, scooted family, but there's definitely a screw loose with some of you all. Like, I mean, for sure. Like with Will, holy moly! Like the stuff he does is mind blowing.
But I'll tell you what, I spend a lot of time in the water with both of them. When it comes to my sessions in the water, with the two of them approach it very differently. Willie is much more cautious.
Yeah.
And Cliff's just like, Samurai wants to do this, we're going to go. So
That's awesome.
it was the perfect people for me to meet for what has transpired in the years since to mesh with everything. And obviously they weren't going to tell me, we don't think you can do this, because they're charging 60-foot waves and then going to eat breakfast. Like,
well, there's a saying Tom Curran once said in Surfers the movie, sometimes you can avoid getting hurt just by going for it. And I think like having that type of attitude of just going for it, you avoid the hurt because you're committing so much to it.
And I think the adrenaline rush for me is, I'm not going to dunk a basketball, which is obviously something that I've
you and
dreamed,
me both, by the way,
that I've obviously dreamed of doing. So it's like the closest thing to an out-of-body experience, especially when I'm out on the bigger days where, we have an entire safety team. Everybody knows what their responsibility is, and I'm going to wipe out at some point.
Yeah.
Like, it's a given, and there's a lot of preparation and just trust in the people that I have around me to make sure, like, we know that you want to have fun, but you got to be safe too.
Do you prefer to wipe out at the beginning of the session to kind of get it over with? Like, kind of, I don't know, like sometimes I prefer that sometimes.
Usually the first wave that'll hit me in the face when we're trying to like duck dive and get me out as easy as possible will be like a wake-up call. Like, all right, it's almost like getting hit with the first punch in a prize fight. Like, this is real now. Like,
do you ever get nervous when you go out, or have like like stomach kind of like woo type of feeling beforehand?
I don't really ever get nervous, mainly because I never learned that I should be nervous, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I have these guys that help me out that luckily are some of the most gifted watermen in the entire world. And I learned that very early on. Like, do you realize who you have around you? Like, not everybody has access to watermen with the skill level like this. Like, so fear has never entered the equation. There's been times where I'm unsure, but it's never been like, I don't know about this. Like, I've never second guessed being out in the water at any point.
I feel like, I feel like the Scootins it's just like in their DNA. I mean, it's like their whole
100%.
family has been like water people and have been, lifesavers, for how long?
Beth and Dave are out there on the big days too, a lot of times.
I know. It's amazing. So I think, one, you have that confidence with them, like the trust level in them is
I'm
incredible.
sure if I didn't have the people around me that I do, the the fear would creep in at certain point. But like the only time I can ever really say I was intimidated was when we went to the U.S. Adaptive Championships.
I wanted to talk about this. Yeah.
So that was the only time I was ever really intimidated because Jesse was in the water with me.
Oh, wow.
Like, so
was he, let me ask you, was he like trying to intimidate you because you were competing against him? And like, was he flexing a little bit? I feel like
there wasn't really a lot of interaction between us because number one, I kind of like to do my own thing. And Joey was there with us too. Joey surfs really, really well. I hope that people will realize like this dude is the original adaptive surfer from the East Coast. Like, so he's in the water and he absolutely rips. But like, I'm in the water against guys that were in the military.
Wow.
And stuff like that. And I'm just some idiot kid from Long Island that's like, all right, I'm here. Let's see what happens.
So how did that competition come about? So that was like 2019, was that?
Yeah, this is before COVID. So
I mean, like there was before, it was when everything was kind of normal and easy for you to kind of travel a little bit more.
So this was always something that we had talked about because the thing that Cliff and Will keep telling me is someday you're going to compete for the Paralympic team, and this contest is the stepping stone to that because obviously there's not a lot of adaptive contests out there, but like this is run by USA Surfing. There's a certain number of spots on the USA Surfing team based on the divisions that you're in, and the divisions are categorized based on your disability that you face. So there's all types of different rules. So this is something that we had talked about for years, but the dates hadn't really lined up because at that point the students are ramping up for the summer season of camp and things like that. And for something like this, I needed them to be around because no matter what the conditions are, they're ready for it.
Yeah.
Everybody else that helps out is great, but they hesitate otherwise, whereas Cliffy especially will just be like, all right, you may take a couple on the head, but we're going to go. Like, it's like I always say, like, he doesn't look at me in the water as any different from himself.
That's what you want, you know, especially when you're competing, you know, I imagine.
Yeah. I tell everybody my last wave in that contest where I made it into the semifinals, you know, he was able to push me into waves, but I had to surf myself because that's how it works. He said to me, like, yo, you better hold on or else it might get a little hairy. So I was holding on dear life because I know, like, this dude's telling me it may get a little hairy. Him telling me it may get a little hairy is completely different than Joe Schmo from Oceanside Harbor telling me it may get a little hairy. He knows what hairy is.
Yes, I can imagine. He's just like, yo, this is going to be a little hairy. And it's like a double overhead wave, I imagine, and pretty steep and a little late drop, probably.
Yeah. Always the late drops.
I'm sorry. So how can you explain for me and our listeners, like how the competition works in terms of like the judging, the scoring? I'm really curious, actually.
It's the same as what you would see in a WSL contest. It's all based on maneuvers, and